This is my true story. I never thought my life would end like this, with my wife taking something so sacred and throwing it away. Our wedding ring was more than metal. It was years of love, struggle, and promises. But one day, she chose to destroy it, along with the bond we shared. I could have shouted, cried, or begged her to stop. Instead, I chose silence. I chose a different kind of answer. And it changed everything. Before I share the rest of my story, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And please subscribe so my stories can reach more people. I spent decades building a life with my wife, brick by brick, with sweat, tears, and endless hours of work. From the first days after our wedding, I dedicated myself to her comfort and safety. I wanted her life to be filled with warmth, joy, and security. Every paycheck, every sacrifice, every sleepless night was for her and for the home we built together. I believed our bond was sacred, that the vows we made were not just words, but promises we lived by. The wedding ring on my finger was more than a circle of gold. It was a symbol of our forever, our unity, and our commitment. I thought she understood it as I did. I thought she felt the weight of that promise as deeply as I did. I thought love was something we protected together, through years of trials, through sickness, through loss, through hardship. I never wavered. I carried her burdens quietly, without complaint. I made choices that would benefit her, even if they cost me comfort. I worked late nights, took extra jobs, and gave up small pleasures so she could have what she deserved. My devotion was constant, steady, unshaken by storms. I believed this devotion would be met with gratitude and love. I believed she knew my heart. I believed she would always cherish what we had. I thought that the ring I wore on my finger was more than gold. It was a daily reminder of our union. It was my way of telling her that no matter what happened, I would be there for her. It was my way of showing her that our marriage was worth everything. I never imagined she could treat it, and me, with such disregard. I never imagined she could erase years of shared life with a single act of cruelty. I never imagined that one day she would take that ring and throw it away like it meant nothing. My devotion had been my strength. I thought it would be our shield against betrayal. But love, I learned too late, can be fragile when trust breaks. And the moment she discarded that ring, she shattered more than metal. She shattered my heart. My world changed that night. I went to bed with hope and woke up with emptiness. The silence after her act was louder than any words could be. It spoke of finality. It spoke of a fracture that could never be repaired. I began to replay our years together in my mind. I remembered the early days of laughter and closeness, the nights we spoke of dreams, the mornings we woke with shared warmth. I remembered the hardships we endured side by side. I remembered the promises spoken in the glow of candlelight, the vows exchanged before witnesses. I remembered how I placed that ring on her finger and felt that forever had begun, and I realized how quickly forever can end when respect is gone. That night, I did not cry out. I did not confront her with anger. I sat quietly, letting the weight of what happened sink into my soul. I understood then that some wounds cannot be healed by pleading or fighting. Some betrayals cannot be repaired with words. This was not a moment to speak. It was a moment to decide. And I decided that I would answer her act with something equally decisive, but without the noise of confrontation. I chose action over argument, and I chose peace over chaos. I began to think about what it meant to truly protect myself, to safeguard my dignity, to guard my heart. I realized that if I continued to live in silence without acting, her betrayal would own my life. I would carry her choice with me forever, a shadow over my years. But if I acted, I could transform that shadow into a lesson. I could turn her cruelty into a declaration of my worth. I could show her, and the world, that I would not be diminished. I decided to speak through action, to let my revenge be quiet, yet certain. I contacted my lawyer and asked about the options I had. I wanted something that matched the depth of what she had done. I wanted to show her that throwing away my ring was not the end of my voice. I wanted to show her that she could not erase the life we built together without consequence. I began to prepare quietly. I knew that this choice would not be easy. I knew it would change both our lives forever. But I also knew that it was the only way to preserve my dignity. So I set the plan in motion, without confrontation, without noise. I signed the papers quietly. I removed her name from every paper she owned that belonged to us jointly. Every deed, every account, every document became a testament to the choice I had made. I erased her name, not out of hate, but as an answer to the act of throwing away something sacred, an answer that would speak without shouting, an answer that would carry the weight of years of betrayal. I carried out this action with calm precision. There was no anger in my movement, only resolution. Every signature was a mark of closure. Every paper became part of a quiet statement. I would not be diminished. I would not be erased. I would not remain silent when my trust was destroyed. That act of removing her name became my voice, my dignity, my answer. When I finally told her, I did not raise my voice. I showed her the signed papers. I let her look at them without interruption. There was no shouting, no pleading, only silence. And in that silence, I saw her disbelief. I saw her anger. I saw her realization that she could not undo what I had done. That night, she left, and I stayed. Now, I walk forward with peace. I walk knowing that I answered betrayal with dignity. I walk knowing that I let go of bitterness. I walk knowing that my action spoke louder than any argument ever could. And as I tell this story now, years later, I say quietly to myself, she took my ring and threw it away. I took her name off every paper she owned, and I let her go. Before that night, there were signs I had missed. I had always thought marriage was built on patience, trust, and constant giving. I had thought I understood my wife completely. I had thought our life together was a steady flame that no wind could extinguish. But I was wrong. Over time, small changes began to grow in silence. Little shifts in her behavior I tried to dismiss. I thought they were temporary. I thought they were normal. But they were the first signs of betrayal. Quiet, hidden, but powerful enough to change everything. It started in the way she looked at me. Her eyes, once warm and full of light, began to lose their softness. There was a coolness in her gaze, a hesitation. I remember the evenings when I would enter the living room after a long day of work, hoping for her smile, only to find her distracted, distant, looking past me rather than at me. I tried to speak, to connect, but her replies became shorter. Her voice, once gentle and caring, became clipped, guarded. It was as if I was speaking to a stranger who lived in my house but did not belong to my world. The changes were subtle at first, easy to dismiss. She still prepared dinner, still tended to our home, but there was no warmth in her actions. Meals felt like routine tasks rather than acts of love. Conversations became transactional. I began to notice that her laughter no longer included me. I would hear it in other rooms or in phone calls, but rarely shared with me. And when I asked her about her day, her answers felt rehearsed, lacking the depth they once had. She was withdrawing, slowly, quietly, and I did not know why. There were moments I confronted myself with doubt. Maybe it was my own fault. Maybe I had failed to keep our marriage alive. Maybe she needed something I could no longer give. I tried to rekindle closeness, tried to share more of myself, tried to speak the words I thought she wanted to hear, but each effort seemed to be met with distance rather than warmth. I began to feel the growing gap between us, but I still clung to hope. Hope that she would return to the way she was. Hope that our years together meant more than these small signs of change. Then came the days of silence. She stopped calling me when I was away. She stopped asking about my work, about my health, about my day. The small gestures of affection vanished. Even when we shared the same room, there was a quiet that felt heavy. I would speak, but her responses would be polite yet empty. There was no spark, no depth, no warmth. It was like living with someone who was physically there, but emotionally absent. And the absence hurt more than any argument or harsh word could. At first, I told myself this was a phase. People change, relationships change. Maybe she was tired, or stressed, or burdened by something I could not see. I gave her space. I let her retreat. I told myself love was about patience, about allowing the other person time to come back to you. But patience has limits, and when patience turns into silence for months, it becomes a wound. I began to feel the weight of that wound growing heavier every day. The final moment before the night she took my ring was a day like any other, yet it carried the truth I had avoided. I had noticed her phone call habits changing. She would leave the room to speak quietly, never letting me hear. When I asked, she smiled and said nothing was wrong, but her eyes told me something else. I began to suspect there was another presence in her life, something she hid from me. I could not confront her without proof, and without proof, I feared I would sound like a jealous old man losing his mind. So I stayed quiet. The betrayal did not arrive with shouting. It arrived with a gesture so small yet so loud it left no doubt. That night, she removed my wedding ring from my finger and threw it away. Not once did she speak to me of her unhappiness. Not once did she explain her silence. She simply removed what had been the most sacred symbol of our life and discarded it. In that moment, she erased years of trust, care, and commitment with an act so deliberate it could not be mistaken for accident. That was when I knew. The signs I had missed were not mistakes. They were steps leading to this moment of betrayal. It was not just the ring she threw away. It was the years of devotion I had carried. Every sacrifice I made, every hardship I endured, every night I came home tired but stayed to speak to her. All of it became meaningless in the way she cast that ring aside. I felt the world collapse in silence. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not demand answers. I simply sat in the quiet that followed, letting the sound of my own heart speak for me. I realized then that this was more than an act of disrespect. It was a declaration. She was telling me without words that what we had was no longer hers, that our vows, our life, and our promises were not worth preserving, that my devotion meant nothing to her anymore. And the realization cut deeper than any wound I had ever known. It was not just betrayal, it was erasure. She had erased our life without a conversation, without a goodbye. And that was the moment I decided I would no longer be silent. I began to think about what my answer should be. It could not be shouting. It would only meet her silence with noise. It could not be begging. It would mean I gave her power over my dignity. It had to be something quieter, something deliberate, something that would speak without shouting. I decided then that I would act in silence, and my action would carry a weight far greater than any words. I would remove her name from the life we had built together. I would remove her name from the papers that bound us. I would let my action tell the story she refused to hear. I contacted my lawyer the next morning. Quietly, without confrontation, I asked about my rights. I wanted to know if what I was about to do was possible. The answer was yes. She had no legal claim to certain properties and documents once we divorced. I did not rush. I planned carefully. Every move had to be precise. Every step had to be done with dignity. I knew that this would be my revenge, not to break her, but to answer her without raising my voice, to answer betrayal with a quiet finality. The work took weeks. I signed papers, filed documents, and ensured that her name was removed from everything we owned jointly. It was done quietly, without fanfare, without confrontation. The ring was gone, but now so was her name from every paper she had once owned with me. My action became my statement. I did not speak it out loud, but it spoke louder than any argument could. When the day came to tell her, I did it without anger. I showed her the papers quietly, letting her read them without interruption. Her face changed, disbelief, anger, regret. She could not find words. I did not offer any. Silence became my voice. That day she left the house, leaving behind what we had built together. I stayed, carrying my answer in quiet dignity. And that is how I began to understand that betrayal is not erased by noise, but answered by silence. That revenge is not always loud, but can be deliberate. That dignity is not given, it is taken. And in removing her name, I found a kind of peace I had lost the night she threw away my ring. That night, when the ring was gone, I felt something inside me shift. It was not a single moment of pain, but a slow, deep fracture that grew louder with each breath. I had lived my life believing marriage was built on respect, trust, and keeping promises through storms and sunshine. I had believed that vows meant something. I had believed that the ring on my finger was not just metal, but a symbol of everything we had built together. That belief, I realized in that moment, was gone. It was not the loss of the ring alone that cut deep. It was the way she threw it away. Not a word, no explanation, no look that said this was difficult for her. Just laughter. Light, cruel laughter that echoed in the quiet of our home. She held it in her hand, and with a flick of her wrist, it was gone. The sound of metal hitting the floor was a quiet sound, but it rang louder in my heart than any shout could. I stared in silence, but inside I was shattered. That act was not just disrespect, it was a statement. She was telling me without speaking that our years together no longer mattered, that every sacrifice I had made, every hardship I endured, every late night working to give her a safe home, every time I put her comfort above my own, it was gone. In her mind, it had no value. She had erased it with the flick of her hand and a laugh. I sat there quietly, watching her, letting her see that I knew. But I did not speak. I knew speaking would not change anything. Her eyes were filled with something I had never seen before: defiance. It was not sadness or regret. It was not hesitation. It was a certainty that she had the right to do what she did, and that certainty hurt more than betrayal itself. For hours after, I could not sleep. I lay awake on the bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing the echo of her laughter again and again. It was not a loud sound. It was a quiet thing that clung to the air between us. Every memory I had of her seemed to pass before my eyes. The day we met, our wedding day, the first home we bought together, the nights we laughed in silence. Every moment seemed to dissolve into the sound of that laughter and the absence of my ring. I thought about confronting her. I thought about asking why. But I knew the answer. It was not about the ring. It was never about the ring. It was about the years, about respect, about how she had grown distant without telling me. It was about something she had been carrying quietly, and now she had thrown away not just a ring, but the life we had built together. The house felt heavier that night. Every corner held memories of laughter and shared dreams. But now there was a quiet emptiness, as if those memories had been erased with the ring. I walked slowly through each room, touching objects that told our story: photographs, letters, trinkets from travels we had taken together. They felt like reminders of something fragile, something that could be broken with a single careless act. And indeed, she had broken it. By morning, my heart was heavy, but my mind was clear. I could no longer live in silence. That night had changed everything. I knew I could not simply continue pretending nothing had happened. She had shown me her truth without saying it. Now, I had to find mine. My answer would not be loud. It would not be shouting or pleading. My answer would be quiet, deliberate, and lasting. That act of cruelty, the throwing away of my ring, had given me clarity. It had shown me where we stood, and it had shown me what I needed to do next. I would not let her act go unanswered. I would not beg her to see what she had done. I would not waste words on someone who had chosen silence over love. I would speak in the only way left to me, through action. That night, I made my decision. I would take her name off every paper she owned that linked her to me. Every document, every title, every account that carried her name alongside mine would be changed. It would be a quiet but final answer, a way to say without words that what she had done was not forgotten, that what she had destroyed was not without consequence. I contacted my lawyer the very next morning. I did not tell her. I did not argue. I moved quietly. I knew this had to be done with precision, without drama, without shouting. I wanted my answer to be sharp, deliberate, and undeniable. The lawyer told me it was possible. Every paper could be changed. Every legal document could be amended. Her name could be erased. It took weeks of preparation. Weeks of quiet calls, signing documents, making sure every detail was correct. I moved without noise. I did not confront her during this time. I did not give her the satisfaction of knowing what I was planning. She continued her life as if nothing had happened. She went about her day, unaware that the man she had dismissed was preparing an answer that would speak louder than her laughter. When everything was ready, I waited for the right moment. I chose a day when we were both at home. I brought the papers to her quietly. No shouting, no drama, just a simple statement of fact. I placed the papers before her and let her read. Her face changed slowly, first disbelief, then anger, then silence. There were no words to explain her feelings. She looked at me as if she was seeing me for the first time, and I let that silence speak for me. That day, she left the house. She took only what she wanted and left behind what we had built. I did not follow her. I did not call after her. I let her go. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of peace. I had answered her cruelty not with noise, but with quiet dignity. I had chosen a path that kept my pride intact. The act of cruelty she committed had become the moment of clarity for me. Her laughter and the throwing away of my ring had been a wound, but it was also a turning point. It was the moment when I chose not to let betrayal define me. I chose to speak with action, not noise, and I chose to protect my dignity above all else. In the end, I learned something profound. Betrayal cannot always be healed by words. Sometimes it can only be answered by decisive, quiet action. Revenge does not need to be loud. Sometimes the deepest answer comes in the silence that follows. That night, when she threw away my ring, she thought she had destroyed me, but in truth, she had given me the gift of knowing who I was and how to answer without speaking. That morning, after she left, the house felt different. Not empty, but altered. Every sound seemed sharper, every silence heavier. The bed felt colder. The walls seemed to hold a quiet echo of the laughter that had broken my heart the night before. I walked slowly from room to room, touching the things we had made together. The photographs of our wedding day, smiling faces framed in silver. The old coffee mugs we bought on a trip years ago, chipped but precious. The small clock we had placed in the hallway, ticking quietly, marking time without complaint. I sat in my favorite chair, the one by the window where the light fell gently in the morning. Outside, the world went on. Birds chirped, the breeze carried the scent of flowers, and life continued without pause. But inside me, something had changed forever. I felt a quiet ache deep in my chest, not loud or burning, but steady and true. It was grief, not just for the ring she had thrown away, but for everything it had represented, for every moment of love, trust, and shared dreams we had once held. I thought of the years we had spent together, the nights when she rested her head on my shoulder, the mornings when we walked side by side to face the day, the quiet evenings filled with conversation and laughter. Those moments felt distant now, like memories from a lifetime ago. I realized then that the ring had been more than a symbol. It had been a promise she had broken without a word, without explanation, without care. I remembered the sound of her laughter, cruel and light, as she tossed the ring away. That sound haunted me more than her words ever could. It was not anger or pain she showed. It was joy in dismissal. She had made her choice loud in silence, and I could not ignore it. I sat quietly, letting the memory of that moment settle deep inside me. I did not cry aloud. I did not shout or question. I let the silence hold me, hold my pain, and let me reflect. Reflection brought clarity. I thought about every sacrifice I had made for her. The long hours I worked to build a home. The times I stayed awake to comfort her. The years I spent keeping promises without expecting anything in return. I saw them all now through a new lens, one tinged with betrayal. It was not just the loss of a ring. It was the loss of respect, the loss of trust, the loss of shared commitment. It was a quiet severing of a bond I had once believed was eternal. That night of reflection became a turning point. I understood that I could not return to the way things were. I could not pretend her laughter and the throwing away of my ring had been a small thing. It was a deep wound, and wounds that deep demand more than silence. They demand an answer. But I knew the answer could not be a loud confrontation. It had to be deliberate, precise, and lasting. I sat for hours in my chair, thinking of what to do next. I knew that anger alone would fade. Words could be forgotten, but action would last. I thought about her name on the papers we owned together, the house, the car, the accounts. Every place her name stood alongside mine was a reminder of promises we had made. If she could erase our commitment with a laugh and a flick of her hand, then I could erase her name quietly, without shouting, without argument. That would be my answer. It was not vengeance for vengeance's sake. It was not about hurting her. It was about preserving my dignity and speaking without words. I realized then that this was not just an act of retaliation. It was an act of self-respect. By removing her name, I would be making a statement that respect cannot be taken lightly, that vows are not to be broken without cost, that love and commitment cannot be dismissed without consequence. The decision was clear. I would act quietly, without noise or drama. I would take my time, make sure everything was correct, and remove her name in a way that would speak louder than any argument. I knew this would take patience, it would take silence and resolve. But I was ready. The night she threw my ring away had given me clarity I had never had before. I was no longer a man who would beg for respect. I was a man who would take it quietly when it was lost. I contacted my lawyer that same week. The man I spoke to was careful and precise, explaining every step, every paper, every detail that would be involved. I listened quietly, asking few questions, letting him outline the process. Every word he spoke was a confirmation of my decision. Her name could be removed. Every paper, every account, every shared asset could be changed. The wedding ring may have been a small thing in size, but in meaning, it was everything. And now my act would reflect that. I began the process without telling her. There was no confrontation. There was no need. Her act had already spoken. Every legal document was reviewed. Every paper where her name stood alongside mine was listed. Deeds, accounts, ownership papers, contracts. Each one was a thread in the tapestry of our life together. I began to unweave that tapestry quietly, piece by piece. It was not easy. It took time and precision, but it was necessary. I wanted my answer to be deliberate, not hasty. I wanted it to be clear and undeniable. During those weeks, life moved on. She continued her days, unaware of the quiet change unfolding. I did not speak of it. I did not confront her. I let her live in the illusion that nothing had changed. She continued her routines, her laughter still light, still distant. But behind the scenes, I was preparing a quiet storm. Every step I took was careful. Every document was signed. Every legal detail was attended to. It was a silent answer to her act of cruelty. When the time came, I knew it would be without noise. I would not shout. I would not demand attention. I would place the truth in her hands quietly and let it speak for itself. The moment would be mine, but it would be spoken without words. I had learned that silence, when chosen deliberately, is the loudest language. That night of reflection had not been easy. It was filled with grief, pain, and a deep sense of loss, but it had also been filled with clarity. I knew what I had to do, and I knew how to do it. My act would be quiet, but powerful. It would be precise. It would be my statement, without a single word. By the time I was ready, my heart was steady. I had chosen my path. I had chosen peace in action. I had chosen dignity over anger. The ring may have been thrown away, but my answer would not be lost. It would be written quietly, deliberately, and without regret. That was my promise to myself, and I kept it. The days after my quiet reflection were the hardest. I lived in a strange state between grief and determination. Every morning I woke with the weight of her laughter in my ears and the echo of the ring hitting the floor in my mind. That sound, so small and yet so sharp, had changed me. I had been patient for years, enduring silence and distance, but that moment became my turning point. I understood that silence alone was no longer enough. I needed action. I sat quietly in the early hours, drinking tea at the table we had shared for decades. Outside, the sky turned pale, the first light of morning seeping through the curtains. The house was still. Her absence was loud. The bed where we slept felt empty, but not just in body. It was empty of trust, empty of shared warmth. I thought about the life we had built together, the promises exchanged, the years that had passed. All of it seemed to collapse into the simple, cruel act of throwing away a ring. That evening, I made my decision. I would not shout. I would not plead. I would not argue. My answer would be in quiet action. I would remove her name from every paper we owned together. I would erase her claim without noise, without spectacle, without shouting across the walls of our home. That act would speak louder than any argument. It would speak of dignity, of choice, and of quiet justice. I thought about what this meant. It was not a small decision. Removing a name from papers, deeds, accounts. These were serious acts. They were legal changes. They were statements. It meant closing chapters, cutting ties. It meant telling her without saying a word that our shared life had ended, not with words or shouting, but with the quiet precision of law. I began to plan. I would not rush. This decision needed preparation. I knew I had to act without haste, without error. I needed every paper, every detail, every signature correct. I wanted her removal from those records to be a silent but undeniable message. I wanted her to know that respect is not given freely when it is taken lightly. I wanted to protect myself without losing my own peace. The decision was not born out of anger. It was born out of reflection. I thought about the years we had spent together. I thought about every sacrifice I had made for her. I thought about the promises we had exchanged when we stood before friends and family. I thought about how a ring had been more than a ring. It had been a promise of forever. And I thought about how easily that promise had been cast away. I thought about my dignity. I thought about my life after her. I knew that walking away without action would leave me with questions, with regret. I knew that silence could be powerful, but only if it was backed by deliberate choice. That choice, I realized, was to take her name off every paper she owned with me. That was my answer, my quiet form of closure. I spent the following days speaking to my lawyer quietly. I did not want to speak to her about it yet. I wanted to prepare. I wanted to ensure that when the time came, my action would be without hesitation and without flaw. My lawyer advised me on every step: deeds, property, bank accounts, shared contracts. Every document where her name was written alongside mine became part of my plan. I took notes. I asked questions. I listened quietly. Every word reinforced my decision. The lawyer warned me that this would be noticed. She would learn. People would speak. But I told him I wanted it quiet. I did not want drama. I did not want shouting. I wanted the statement to be made without noise. I wanted it to be something she would see, and in that moment, understand. This was my dignity speaking. This was my answer to her act of cruelty. I began gathering the documents. Each paper I touched felt heavier than the last. Deeds to our home, ownership papers to property, bank account agreements. Each one was a piece of our life together. I held them in my hands and thought of the years behind them. I thought of the life we had built and how fragile it had become in the space of a single action. I knew I could not turn back. My decision was final. I worked quietly for weeks. I made no announcement. I spoke to no one about it. Each day I went through the papers with care. Each step was deliberate. Every signature required precision. Every removal of her name was done with thought. I knew this was not just about property. It was about the silent message I wanted to give her. That respect cannot be broken without consequence. Every day I felt the weight of my choice, not in anger, but in gravity. I knew this was more than a legal matter. It was a matter of my peace. It was about ending what had been broken without becoming broken myself. It was about walking away with dignity, without bitterness, without noise. I wanted this to be my voice. I wanted my action to speak louder than arguments ever could. I thought about her face the night she threw the ring away. I thought about the laughter, the defiance, the lack of remorse. That memory pushed me forward. I wanted her to understand without me saying a word. My decision was my answer. The quiet removal of her name was the statement I needed to make. I did not rush the process. I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted it to be deliberate. I wanted it to reflect my pain, my dignity, and my quiet strength. Every document was reviewed, every paper signed, every detail confirmed. I moved quietly, steadily, without fanfare. This was not revenge born of anger. It was justice born of respect for myself. I knew the day would come when she would learn. I knew the moment would arrive when she would see her name gone. I knew there would be shock, disbelief, perhaps anger. But I also knew that there would be clarity. My silence would speak, and my action would be my answer. I was at peace with that. In my quiet way, I had made my decision. I had chosen my peace over noise. I had chosen dignity over confrontation. I had chosen a form of closure that was deliberate and lasting. I had chosen to answer without words. That was my decision. That was my promise to myself, and I would keep it. The morning I decided to act, I woke earlier than usual. The sky was gray and calm, as if it too understood the weight of what I was about to do. I drank my tea slowly, sitting at the table where we had shared so many quiet mornings. The house felt heavier that day, but not with noise. It was heavy with decision. I felt no anger, only resolve. This was not a day for shouting or pleading. This was a day for quiet truth. I dressed slowly, with care. I chose my clothes not for ceremony, but for calmness. A simple shirt, trousers, and my old shoes that had walked beside me for decades. I wanted my steps that day to be measured, certain. I wanted my action to have the dignity I had chosen in my decision. I took the folder of papers I had prepared and placed it gently beside my cup. I touched the ring I still wore on my other hand, now dull and cold, and remembered the night it was thrown away. That memory strengthened my resolve. Before leaving the house, I walked through the rooms slowly. Each room carried its own memories, laughter, tears, dreams, and promises. I did not speak. I did not glance back. I knew my act would speak for me. I went to my lawyer's office without telling her, without announcing. This was not a scene I wanted to create. This was not about spectacle. It was about finality. When I arrived, the lawyer was ready. She had all the documents prepared, signed where necessary, witnesses lined, papers stamped, and legal procedures followed to perfection. She looked at me quietly, understanding without words the meaning of what was about to happen. There was no rush. There was no drama. We moved steadily, deliberately. Every document was a statement. Every signature a part of the truth I had chosen to live by. The action itself was simple in form, but heavy in meaning. One by one, papers were signed, names removed, deeds altered. Bank accounts were changed, property papers rewritten. Every record that bore her name alongside mine was altered to reflect my choice. I was not angry as I signed. There was no fury, only a deep sense of peace. This was not about taking revenge in loudness, but about restoring my own dignity in silence. Once the final paper was signed, I folded the folder neatly. The weight of those papers was not in ink and stamps, but in years of life. Years of love, years of shared effort, years of broken trust. Every signature was a quiet reply to her act of throwing away a ring. Every alteration of a paper was a message without sound, a message that told her what her choice had cost her. I left the lawyer's office without announcement. I walked slowly back to the house. The air outside felt heavier, as though it knew this day marked an ending. I kept my head down. I carried no pride in noise, no victory in yelling. I carried a quiet resolve. This was my answer, my peace, my truth. I walked through the door and placed the folder on the table. I did not speak. I did not explain. I simply sat in silence. She looked at me, surprise in her eyes. She asked nothing. There was no need for questions. The silence in the room was louder than any words could be. I reached for her hand, not in anger, but in farewell. Then I rose and left. My steps were slow but steady, carrying the quiet dignity I had fought to keep. I did not look back as I closed the door. I left her in the stillness of the home we once shared, with the truth resting quietly in the papers I had signed. That was my act. That was my message. No shouting, no pleading, no spectacle. Only the deliberate, quiet removal of her name. It was not revenge in the way the world understands it. It was a form of exposure, yes, but also a form of peace. I exposed the truth without raising my voice. I acted without spectacle. My action was my answer. My silence was my statement. And in that quiet, I found the justice I had sought. When neighbors learned of what I had done, they spoke in hushed tones. Some said I was harsh, others said I was wise. I said nothing to anyone. I walked my days quietly, letting the papers speak for me, letting the silence speak louder than any argument could. I knew she would learn soon. I knew she would open her own papers, her deeds, her accounts, and find herself erased in quiet precision. I knew that in that moment she would understand, not through shouting or confrontation, but through the weight of quiet truth. My action was my answer. My choice was my peace. That morning, the air was still and quiet. The house seemed heavier than usual, as if it knew something was about to change. He walked in without a word, holding a stack of papers in his hands. The papers were neat, precise, stamped, and signed. They were the proof of the decision he had made, not in anger, but in deep, cold resolution. He placed them on the table without looking her in the eyes, his face steady, almost expressionless. For years, those walls had witnessed love, laughter, arguments, forgiveness, and quiet moments. But they had also witnessed distance grow between them, layer by layer. The silence of the past weeks had spoken louder than any fight, and today he would speak without raising his voice. She was sitting by the window, staring out at the street. When he placed the papers down, she did not look at him. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers trembling slightly, though she pretended she did not notice. The ring, once a circle of promise, was gone, thrown away in an act that still echoed in his mind. He did not mention it. He knew words would not heal this wound, nor would they erase what had happened. He cleared his throat softly, drawing her attention to the papers. Without an argument, without a raised tone, he said simply, "These are the papers." That voice, calm, steady, without anger, carried a weight she had not heard in years. It was not rage, it was certainty. Her eyes finally moved from the window to him. For the first time in weeks, she looked at him directly, her gaze filled with confusion and disbelief. "What is this?" she asked quietly, her voice lacking the sharpness she usually used. "These are the documents," he said simply. "Every paper that carried your name, every title, every account, every document. Your name is no longer there." He spoke with a quiet finality that filled the room. His words were not loud, but they carried the kind of certainty that does not require volume. She blinked, as if trying to make sense of what he had just said. She reached for the papers, hesitated, then pulled them closer to her. Her hands shook now, betraying the composure she tried to hold. As she read each line, the disbelief on her face deepened. Her eyes moved across the fine print, her lips pressed together tightly, her breath coming in shallow bursts. 20 minutes earlier, the house had been filled with the sounds of laughter, of celebration. She had been basking in a pride that came from triumph, from the false belief that possession of wealth meant possession of the right to everything she desired. But now, in this quiet morning, she was facing a different reality. His calmness in delivering this revelation made it all the more striking. Neighbors could hear silence through the walls, but nothing more. She had kicked him out before, claiming she wanted independence, claiming she was building her own life. Yet she had never imagined he would respond without fury, without a dramatic confrontation. This quiet, this dignified silence was worse for her pride than shouting ever could be. Her face flushed with anger and disbelief. She looked up at him now, words caught in her throat. Her voice cracked when she tried to speak. She opened her mouth and closed it again, unsure how to respond. He remained still, his eyes fixed on her face, but saying nothing. His silence was deliberate, a mirror of her own silence when she discarded their years together without a word. When she finally found her voice, it was sharp but uncertain. Why? How could you do this without telling me? The words fell into the air like fragile glass, breaking under their own weight. He did not answer immediately. His calmness was not weakness. It was the strength of a man who had reached the end of his patience. I told you nothing before, because silence is the answer I owed myself, he said softly. You took my ring, threw away my promise, and erased the meaning of our vows. I am simply returning your choice to you. No names, no ties, no claims. His words were slow, measured, and they sank deep into her mind. For a long moment, she said nothing. She just stared at the papers, her hands clutching them as if she could burn the ink with her grip. Her breathing quickened. The air between them was heavy, filled with the weight of years of memories and the silence of broken promises. The house seemed to shrink under the gravity of the moment. She looked up again, meeting his eyes, and for a second, there was no anger. Only something else, confusion, sadness, perhaps regret. But pride held her still. She folded the papers slowly, placed them back on the table, and turned away. He did not move. He knew she needed this moment to herself. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. You've changed everything. He nodded once. Everything changes when respect is gone. This was the only choice left. His voice carried neither triumph nor malice. It carried only truth. Outside, the day moved on, indifferent to the battle that had just been fought in the quiet of their home. The morning light fell softly through the window, touching the table where the papers lay. They were more than documents. They were the silent answer to years of unspoken betrayal. She left the room without another word. He stayed behind, looking at the papers, not touching them. His heart was steady. His decision was made. The quiet revelation had spoken louder than any argument ever could. That day, she learned something she had never expected, that revenge need not be loud to be complete, that truth need not be shouted to wound, and that silence could carry the deepest justice of all. The revelation was complete. She no longer had his ring. She no longer had his name. And in the quiet of the house they once shared, he had reclaimed his dignity, his peace, and the right to walk away without bitterness. The hours after the revelation were heavy. The house no longer felt the same. Silence had settled in like a weight that could not be lifted. Neighbors, who once heard laughter, heard now only quiet. Rumors began to spread softly at first, then louder. The word of what had happened between them traveled through the street like wind over dry leaves. Some neighbors whispered with sympathy for him. Others questioned her pride. But no one knew the full story, and yet everyone felt its ripple. His friends, those who had known him for decades, began to speak quietly in corners. He always loved her, they said. He never deserved this. They did not know the full truth of her actions, but they felt the weight of his silence. It was not a silence of surrender, but a silence of victory and dignity. Those who had once doubted him now watched with quiet respect. She moved differently after that morning. Her steps grew heavier, her voice quieter, as though she carried the weight of the papers with her wherever she went. The pride she had worn like armor now seemed fragile. She no longer spoke of the house as hers, nor the possessions inside it. Even the rooms felt different, colder, less certain. She was learning in quiet pieces the cost of her choice. At family gatherings, the atmosphere shifted. Relatives who had once avoided confrontation now exchanged glances. Some spoke softly of betrayal, others of revenge, but no one spoke loudly of what had happened. It was a wound they treated with careful silence. She avoided him in those gatherings. When he entered the room, she looked away. She did not wish to meet his eyes. She could not bear to. The news of the removal of her name spread slowly, quietly. Friends who once gathered with them now wondered if the bond could ever be restored. Some offered her support, though silently, as if they feared the truth. Others offered him quiet nods of respect, recognizing a dignity they had never expected. The change was not just between them. It was felt by everyone around them. The silence between them became louder than any argument they had ever had. For him, there was no victory in noise. He carried no joy in seeing her stunned or angry. His peace was quiet and unshakable. He knew the truth of what had happened and the meaning of his choice. It was not to punish her, but to preserve his own dignity. In those moments, he learned that silence could be the loudest answer to betrayal. She withdrew from their shared world, closing herself off from friends and family who looked at her differently now. She spoke less of her victories and wealth, and more of the emptiness she felt. The laughter she once carried was now absent. She lived in a quiet house with possessions, but without the respect or love she had once taken for granted. In the weeks that followed, her pride began to crack. At first, she did not understand the depth of what had happened. She thought she had won, that her act had freed her from him. But the quiet truth began to settle in her mind. She had lost something far greater than a name. She had lost the respect of the man who had once given her everything. Outside the walls of their home, neighbors continued to whisper. Some said she had been cruel. Others said he had been patient far too long. But all felt the weight of what had happened that morning. His silence after the revelation became a powerful presence in their street. It spoke of finality, of dignity reclaimed, and of a man who chose peace over chaos. For him, the days became quieter. He moved through the house with steady steps, no rush, no loud declarations. Each movement was a statement in itself, a life rebuilt without anger. He knew the gossip outside would fade, but his peace would remain. The papers he had placed on the table that morning were no longer just legal documents. They were a testament to his choice to end the chapter with calm, without hatred. She began to understand, slowly, that the house now carried a different story. Rooms that once held laughter now held silence. Hallways that echoed with shared memories now echoed with absence. Her wealth could not replace the bond she had destroyed, nor could her pride restore what was lost. Even friends who once sided with her began to see the change. They noticed the quiet dignity in his life, the way he walked with his head held high without bitterness. And they noticed her silence, not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that comes from regret. Neighbors began to offer small gestures. Some greeted him warmly, others avoided mentioning her name. The street became a place where silence spoke louder than words, and where respect was given without declaration. He became known quietly for his dignity and the strength to walk away without malice. She moved through her days carrying the quiet weight of what had happened. She avoided mirrors, perhaps to avoid seeing the pride that had been stripped away. She moved without the certainty she once wore, and slowly she learned that the cost of pride was higher than she had ever imagined. In time, he left the house for long walks. He walked without hurry, without a destination. His steps carried peace, not bitterness. His silence was no longer heavy. It was freeing. He had acted with quiet precision, and now he lived in quiet strength. The house stood as a monument to their story, not just to love or betrayal, but to the truth that dignity cannot be taken away by anger. It comes from choice and the courage to live without resentment. She learned this truth too, though slowly. Pride had cost her more than she realized. His silence had become her loudest lesson. In the quiet of her own thoughts, she began to understand the power of his decision. It was not revenge. It was a reclaiming of self-respect. By the end of the year, the streets had grown used to the story. His name was spoken with quiet respect, hers with quiet regret. He continued to walk without bitterness. She continued to live with an emptiness she could not fill. He knew the truth. Her name was no longer on paper, but her place in his life had been removed long before. He had given her every chance to return, but silence had spoken louder than any plea. The fallout was complete, not with anger, but with peace, and in that quiet peace, he found the strength to live again. The days after the fallout were quieter than any he had known in years. There was no shouting, no blame, no drama, only silence. It was a silence filled with meaning, a silence that carried with it the weight of years and the depth of his choice. He walked through the house differently now. Every step he took was measured, not hurried. There was no rush in his movement. He lived slowly, deliberately, as though he had chosen to live in peace after the storm. He did not speak much of what had happened. To friends who asked, he gave small answers. To neighbors who whispered, he gave quiet nods. He knew words were not necessary to carry the truth. His peace was louder than any explanation he could offer. It came from knowing he had acted not in anger, but in integrity. He had chosen dignity over vengeance, and that choice gave him a strength he had not felt in years. Morning light came softly through the curtains now. He would sit by the window for hours, watching the world pass by. Sometimes he thought of her, not with bitterness, but with a quiet acceptance. She had chosen her path, and he had chosen his. His peace was in knowing that he had stepped away without losing himself. He no longer carried the weight of trying to prove something to her or to the world. He carried only the weight of his own dignity. Friends began to notice a change in him. Those who had seen him wounded, quiet, and hurt now saw a man who had reclaimed himself. They began to speak softly of his calmness, his grace. Some said he had found the wisdom of old age. Others said he had found the strength of letting go. He did not correct them. Peace was something he carried without announcement. It lived quietly within him. He began to take long walks in the mornings. The streets became his sanctuary. Neighbors would nod as he passed, sensing the quiet dignity in his steps. He no longer avoided the world, but he no longer sought it. His peace was inward. He had given up fighting battles that no longer mattered. He had let go of the bitterness that once burned within him. And in that letting go, he found a deep calm he had never known before. Evenings were quieter now. He would sit alone with a cup of tea, letting the warmth rest in his hands. He thought less of the ring that was thrown away and more of the life he had chosen to keep. Not her name, not her presence, but his own peace. He understood now that peace was not something given by others. It was something taken, claimed, and lived. His choice to remove her name from every paper she owned was not just about justice. It was about reclaiming his right to peace. He learned that peace did not come in loud declarations. It came in quiet acts of self-respect. It came in walking away without bitterness. It came in holding dignity as a treasure more precious than anything else. He found peace in knowing he no longer needed to prove himself to her or to anyone else. He lived quietly, carrying his choice with grace. In the weeks that followed, he realized peace was not just the absence of conflict. It was a state of being. It was waking up without the weight of resentment. It was living without the need to prove anything. He found joy in simple moments, the sound of birds at dawn, the warmth of sunlight on his face, the quiet passing of days. Peace had become his companion, and he cherished it above all else. He came to see that peace was also the gift he gave himself. It was the reward of a heart that had chosen dignity over anger. The removal of her name from every paper was not an act of spite, but an act of liberation. He had freed himself from the ties that bound him to betrayal, and in that freedom he found a new kind of strength. Neighbors began to speak of him differently. They saw a man who had faced cruelty and walked away with grace. They saw a man who had turned betrayal into a lesson of peace. They began to seek his quiet counsel, to watch his calm with admiration. He spoke little, but what he spoke carried weight. His peace was a lesson in itself. He lived each day with quiet dignity. He no longer sought recognition or applause. He had found a peace that was self-sustaining, a peace that came from deep within. His home became a place of calm, a sanctuary where silence spoke louder than words. And in that silence, he found healing. She too began to understand the power of his choice. She lived with the echo of his peace, even in her absence. The ring she threw away had been replaced by something she could not take back, his quiet dignity. It became her lesson, though she might never say it aloud. Years later, he still walked the streets quietly, living each day as a testament to his choice. He had lost her name from papers, but he had found his own name in peace. And that, he knew, was worth more than anything she could take away. He learned that peace was not the absence of pain, but the presence of strength. It was a quiet decision to walk away, to let go without hatred, to live without regret. His peace was his victory. His silence was his answer. And in that quiet, he found a life worth living. Now, as an old man, he sits quietly by the window, looking at the world without hurry. Time has given him perspective, and peace has become the heart of his story. He speaks rarely, but when he does, his words carry the weight of lived experience. He tells the story calmly, without anger, without bitterness, without need for justification. It is not a tale of victory in the way the world understands it, but a story of dignity reclaimed. He understands now that life is not about winning arguments, but preserving one's own soul. He remembers the day she threw away his wedding ring like it was yesterday. It was not just metal she cast aside, but years of shared dreams, promises, and trust. The moment hurt him deeply, yet he learned that pain could be transformed into something stronger. He learned that dignity was more valuable than any ring, any word, any act of reconciliation that came from someone who had lost their way. He chose not to fight with noise or anger, but with quiet determination. That choice became his answer to betrayal. Looking back, he realizes that his life was shaped by that moment. The decision to take her name off every paper she owned was not an act of cruelty, but an act of self-preservation. It was his way of saying that he would not let the betrayal define him. It was his way of protecting his heart. Removing her name became symbolic, not of revenge, but of closure. It was a boundary he set for himself, a way to reclaim control over the life she had sought to diminish. In quiet moments, he reflects on the years of devotion he gave her. Every day, every sacrifice, every small act of love still lives within him. But those memories are no longer painful chains. They are part of the fabric of his peace. They remind him that he loved deeply and gave freely, without expectation. And in that love, even when it was met with betrayal, there was strength. Strength that became the foundation for the peace he now carries. He thinks of what he learned from this pain. He learned that respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. He learned that dignity is a choice, not a condition. And he learned that forgiveness is not something given to another, but something we give to ourselves. His peace today is the result of choosing forgiveness over hatred, dignity over revenge, silence over chaos. That choice has carried him through the years. Neighbors often ask him how he found peace. He does not give them a detailed answer, because peace is not something you explain. It is something you live. It comes not from winning battles, but from choosing not to fight battles that cost the soul. His peace was found in letting go quietly. It was found in removing her name without a fight. It was found in walking away without noise, without rage, and without regret. That is the lesson he offers without speaking loudly. He sits now in quiet reflection, feeling the weight of years in his bones. His hands are still strong, though they have known labor and hardship. His eyes are calm, though they have seen betrayal and loss. His heart is full, not with resentment, but with the quiet strength of a man who chose peace. He knows the ring she threw away cannot be returned, but the dignity he preserved is something no one can take. He has learned that peace is the greatest form of revenge. It is the proof that no cruelty can take from you what you decide to keep. His name remains his own, and his peace is his legacy. He understands now that life's worth is not measured by possessions, but by the dignity with which we live. The ring was gone, her name was removed, but his peace was something eternal. He tells this story now not to justify himself, but to offer a quiet truth. That peace is possible after betrayal. That dignity can survive heartbreak. That silence can speak louder than confrontation. That letting go can be the greatest victory of all. His life became proof of that truth. As he sits in his quiet home, he realizes that this peace is the thing he will carry to the end. It is the answer to betrayal. It is the shield against bitterness. It is the quiet, unshakable truth that he made the choice to walk away with his dignity intact. His final thought, as his voice softens, is this: "She took my ring and threw it away. I took her name and let her go. And in that, I found peace." His reflection is now his story, a story of love lost, of dignity preserved, of peace won. He knows that he will not change the past, but he has changed himself, and in that change, he has found a kind of victory that no one can take away. The peace he speaks of is not just a word, it is a life lived with intention. It is a heart freed from the weight of revenge. It is the quiet acceptance that some battles are worth losing so that the soul can be won. He carries this peace as the most precious thing in his life. As the sun sets, he sits quietly, letting the light fade. He does not fear the darkness. He knows that peace has no shadow. And so, in his silence, he smiles softly. He smiles because he knows that he has chosen the hardest and the most beautiful path. The path of letting go. The path of quiet dignity. The path of peace.